And we are back with more on News Talk Saga 960. So very glad you could join us on this edition of the Mark Petrano Show. Well, the mandates continue despite the pressure that has been put on Justin Trudeau, his government. He has shown little indication, little movement on the idea of lifting these mandates, even as case numbers fall and the rationale, the reasoning for these travel mandates continue to evaporate. So what's going on here? Why does he persist in pushing a policy that is causing so much misery for so many people? We're talking about 5 to 6 million Canadians who either will not uh, admit or talk about publicly their vax status, or they've just declined to get the COVID jabs altogether. And as a result, they're being restricted in terms of their movement against their own charter rights, which guarantees their mobility rights. But this prime minister obviously doesn't care too much about that. Let's bring in Cosmin Dzsurda. Cosmin is an independent journalist. He works for TNC.news. He's been keeping an eye on this story, along with a lot of other stuff, including his terrific work on the Davos conference, the bizarre, in some cases, pronouncements that came out of that by the World Economic Forum. Welcome once again, Cosmin.
Thanks, Mark. Happy to be here.
Let's talk a little bit about Justin Trudeau's latest statement. He keeps getting asked about this. We saw the vote that failed. This was Melissa Lantsman's motion to lift these mandates. And here's a tweet by Ezra Levant. It's not science. That's an authoritarian bully. That's part of it. Okay, so it starts off, he says, no other country is locking down unvaccinated people from flying just in case. Seriously, that's all he's got. It's not science. He's an authoritarian bully. That is tolerated by the media party, the mainstream media, and the courts show you that Canada's decay as a democratic country. Sorry for stumbling through that, but let's listen a little bit to this clip. This is Justin Trudeau talking about this issue.
The travel restrictions, the tourism groups want them lifted, and there has been some criticism that the communication around the reasoning hasn't been transparent.
Well, the reality is, as much as people would like to pretend we're not, we're still in a pandemic. There are Canadians who die every single day because of COVID-19 in our hospitals. We are still at risk, particularly at risk as fall approaches of new variants. We need to make sure we're doing everything we can to keep Canadians safe. And I know people are eager to get back to things we love, but what will also further damage our tourism industry is if we get another wave, if we get more serious impacts.
Unbelievable.
That's why every single time we have been anchored in science. We're reflecting on what the best way to do to make sure that we can get back to the things we love as quickly as possible without putting ourselves at risk.
It sounds like
health crises.
It sounds like as long as there's one case of COVID in the country, that somehow these mandates are justifiable. I guess he's an advocate of the zero COVID policy that we're seeing played out to disastrous consequences in China, where a huge city, Shanghai, millions of people locked in their homes because there were some cases of COVID. I mean, this is ridiculous. This guy is a psychopath, Cosmin. This is about being vindictive. He's a hateful individual, and what he's doing to the people of Canada is criminal. What say you?
So I think you said it right when you asked, what will it take? Will it take zero COVID cases? Will it take the WHO declaring that the pandemic is over? I'm not really sure. It's entirely senseless. Canada's travel mandates are the strictest in the world, some of the strictest in the world, if you leave out China. So it's quite astounding that a democratic country can continue these restrictions on millions of Canadians in light of what we know about COVID. Even going back to when these mandates were first introduced, it made no sense. For example, Europe has had travel restrictions, but they allow unvaccinated to go on planes. If you get a negative COVID test or you show that you have antibodies to COVID-19, you could fly freely throughout the European Union according to their rules. So we know today that vaccinated people can spread this virus just as easily. So it makes no sense that we're allowing people into massive stadiums to go to concerts, nightclubs, etc., but we can't put somebody in a plane for a couple hours, even if they show a negative test, right? We have random testing at our airports. As you said, it's vindictive, and I think the opposition, the Conservatives, are rightly so challenging our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on this issue, because it's vindictive, and I can't see it in any other way.
Do you think that the global pressure placed on this guy? We had the organization that represents airline industry, for instance, coming out not that long ago and saying, look, you have to lift these. We're seeing chaos at airports, obviously Canadian ones, but not only just Canadians, others. And part of it is due to these ridiculous mandates, the burning hoops that you have to go through in order to accommodate these COVID mandates that are no longer relevant and no longer helpful. So do you think that if enough pressure is brought to bear on this person, that that will have an impact? Or is he so far gone that this guy is not paying attention to anybody but himself and his little circle of advisors?
You know, I think there's pressure on many sides. I'm sure there's also pressure coming from people who want to see these mandates continue, COVID zero advocates, etc. But I think the Liberals are essentially waiting until fall, winter of this year, counting on, in a very cynical way, another wave of COVID-19 cases, or another variant, so that they can justify this decision, and they'll say, yo, look, we played it safe and we did the right thing. But if that wave doesn't come, if that variant fails, I don't see, it will become untenable to continue this policy unless the NDP continues to prop up the Liberal government, which it has shown more willingness to do over the last few months in almost everything, because they're getting all sorts of policy promises, including most recently the decriminalization of drugs here in BC. So it's a win-win situation. Justin Trudeau gets to punish his political opponents, those who won't listen to the federal government. And the argument that individuals who support this policy often make is it's a way to sort of convince people to get vaccinated. But I think we're beyond that point. Those people who have refused to get the COVID-19 vaccine for whatever reasons, personal choices, are not going to get the vaccine now after not being able to travel for, I guess, over a year now. So it makes no sense whichever way you look at it.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about another story that you're working on, the World Economic Forum, the 8 most radical proposals to control people's lives. Can you run through the big 8? I mean, we've heard some rumors about them, the trace and tracking and stuff like that. Talk about that.
Right. So there's I think there's more than 8 if you go through all the events, but these were the most radical or the ones that stood out the most. And this one actually got quite a bit of international attention. One executive with Alibaba, which is a Chinese e-commerce platform akin to Amazon, they revealed that they're developing an individual carbon footprint, which would track what individuals consumed, where individuals traveled, how they traveled, etc., and create a sort of carbon emission score. Now, not only is that outrageous, but it is also very concerning that this is a company that is in cahoots with the Chinese government. If you know anything about Chinese law, all corporations operating within China are required to cooperate with its intelligence service by law, and could face punishment if they don't do so. So an individual carbon footprint that's controlled by a major Chinese corporation should be concerning to everybody. And it's a product I would highly recommend nobody would install or have on their phone. Now, this isn't something new. It's been individual carbon footprint trackers have been floated before. There are other companies developing this technology. I know of one case where it was employed for small businesses to track their carbon output, but it's actually there's one airport, I think, in Australia that is in a partnership with one of these companies that have this sort of product, and they give discounts for people who can show that they have a lower carbon output.
Let's listen to the Alibaba president, Michael Evans, talk about that.
We're developing through technology an ability for consumers to measure their own carbon footprint. What does that mean? That's where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So individual carbon footprint tracker. Stay tuned. We don't have it operational yet, but this is something that we're working on.
All right. So some rather naive people say, oh, well, you can measure your own carbon footprint, as if Alibaba is working on this completely as an altruistic thing. I mean, obviously, they're there to collect data, to process this data, and then sell data just the same way that Google does and Facebook does. I mean, it is naive in the extreme to think that these people are spending millions of dollars to develop this thing, only to suggest that people are that you will have access to that information yourself, and nobody else will have that. This is track and trace, and there's no other way really to interpret this. Cosmin, what do you think?
Absolutely, it's foolish to suggest that an application is only for an individual's use in terms of access to the data you input into that application or software, etc. We know that these companies track your data, they sell it, use it for their own purposes, like advertising, or to customize their experience towards your individual needs. So saying that this is only for individuals to track their own thing, it's just outrageous and totally false. One, as I wrote in the title of that article, the most unifying thing of the World Economic Forum proposals that I saw is more control over people's lives. All of the proposals I wrote in that article have that theme in common: control. We need to control what you eat. We need to control how you travel. We need to control the economy more. So it's really concerning when we see this trend towards more globalized centralization of different aspects of our lives. You know, I tweeted, I thought, you know, you think it's bad that there's some bureaucrat in Ottawa who's deciding what you get to do or how you get to live your life. Wait until there's some bureaucrat in Geneva, Switzerland, or at the headquarters of the UN imposing things on your life. I think that's the way things are going, and it's the stated interest of elites who participate in these internationalist conferences that propose policy, and it's no surprise that governments do eventually adopt these policies. Our own government has expressed interest in the Great Reset proposed by Klaus Schwab. You know, they're all advocates of stakeholder capitalism, which was a concept, an economic concept developed by him in a book that he's written. So all these people in the media, etc., who say, well, no, the World Economic Forum doesn't have any influence, it's totally false. Of course it has influence. All of these gatherings serve to promote networking, to promote the sharing of ideas, and eventually the adoption of those ideas.
Let's talk about another story that you've got in the hopper here with TNC.news. 1,600 soldiers sideswiped by military vaccine requirements. Nearly 1,600 Canadian soldiers in the regular forces have quit, been kicked out, or faced discipline for not complying with the Trudeau government's mandatory COVID vaccination policy. According to Blacklock's reporter, the Department of National Defense also forced 307 civilian employees on unpaid leave for not showing proof of at least 2 COVID shots. This is the kind of stuff that would have been imaginable 2 years ago. I mean, Trudeau himself came out and said, we're not in the business of forcing people to take shots they don't want. And now here we are punishing people for making a medical decision. So it's like these people are trying to strip you out of your bodily autonomy. In other words, to say, no, you don't have the right. The state decides what goes into your body. This is absolutely totalitarian in nature. It's dictatorial. in the extreme. It's authoritarian in the extreme because there's nothing more intrusive than your own body. And if the state can tell you what to put in your own body, we're nothing more than livestock. So the idea that people still, a lot of them in the bought off chimps in the media, they're still playing these mental games, these delusional games, that somehow this is justifiable, that this is just another day at the office. But this is a big story, and unfortunately, the military is part of the the canary in the coal mine. I mean, in terms of those who have paid the price for not going along, for not agreeing to be bullied into taking shots that they don't want.
For sure. I think we're seeing a trend of the politicization of institutions like the military, like policing, over the last decade. It's increasingly becoming subject to the whims of political power. And I think the COVID-19 vaccination mandate is an example of that. Now, we can say that the military has vaccination requirements. I mean, if you go to serve in certain countries in Africa, etc., you will need to get certain vaccines. But the question is whether the COVID-19 vaccine was effective in any meaningful way of reducing the spread of disease among soldiers. And I'm not entirely convinced whether it was necessary. So all these soldiers are being put out of the military because they refuse to follow an order based on their personal conscience or health reasons, etc. They don't actually approve very many people with exemption status. As we know across the board, exemptions are very hard to get for COVID-19 vaccine mandates. And these soldiers, some of whom have served their country for decades, abroad, here in Canada, in Afghanistan, are being kicked to the curb, facing what's essentially a dishonorable discharge that will remain on their records. They can't join the military again. It's gonna be there for the rest of their lives. And it's really astounding to me how we're treating and scapegoating a group of people based on a personal decision that they made that realistically doesn't harm other people. As we know, and I said this already, you can spread COVID-19 if you're vaccinated. That's just the fact. So it's astounding that these healthy young soldiers who are in the prime of their life are being subject to this because of some fear, irrational fear in the bureaucracy. And this it's tantamount to sort of trying to weed out people who disobey you, so that the only remaining the remnants are totally easily able to control.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's beyond outrageous, but here we are. And it's amazing how they've managed to make it normal. You know what I mean? It's like we're talking about, and it really conjures up for me an image of I understand better now what took place in Nazi Germany in the 30s, when people were, over the course of years, brought into the mundane normalcy of genocide. It didn't happen overnight. Obviously, it was coerced. It was brainwashing. It was the coercion of people. It was the demonizing of people, of a segment of society, and that's his playbook. It's his playbook. Anyway, how do people consume your terrific content, Cosmin?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at CosminDZS, or you can find us at tnc.news to read True North content.
All right, Cosmin Dzsurda, tnc.news. Got to take a break. Back with more on Newstalk Saga 960 and the Mark Patronis Show after.